Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Overcoming the Arctic Drilling Challenge, brought to you by ERIELL Group, one of the largest independent oilfield services companies in the Eurasian region. Founded in 2004, ERIELL provides well construction and workover services to major oil and gas companies in Central Asia, Russia and the Middle East. It cooperates with Russian and international companies such as Rosneft, Novatek, Gazprom Neft, Lukoil, Uzbek Neftegas, Petronas, CMPC, MOL, and others. The Arctic has been hailed as the future of Russia's oil and gas industry, but developing the vast reserves found there is no easy undertaking. Today we discuss the technological, logistical, and climatic difficulties that operators and contractors in Russia's far north must confront, as well as what development prospects there are for the region's many trillions of cubic meters of natural gas resources. My name is Joseph Murphy and I will be moderating the discussion today. Joining me are Vitaly Dokunikhin, CEO of ERIELL Russia, Aleksandr Milenkiy, Chief Engineer of ERIELL NEFTEGAZSERVICE, and Mark Gyetvay, CFO of Russian gas producer Novatek. Before we begin today's discussion, I'd like to briefly provide some information for viewers. As some of our panelists today will be speaking Russian, viewers are invited to use the interpretation function found at the bottom of the page to switch between Russian and English audio. Viewers can also submit questions at any point during the discussion, and they will be addressed at the end. Please do so in the questions box rather than the chat box, and write which panelist you would like to address your question to. And with that, let's begin with opening questions. So Vitaly, the Arctic is, to be fair, quite a remote place. Let's talk about the logistical challenge. So, the challenge in bringing workers and equipment, potentially thousands of kilometers to where they need to be. What lessons can service companies take from ERIELL's experience?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to tell you about our experience working in Arctic. And we sometimes joke that we are not exactly a drilling company, but rather a logistics and drilling company, because throughout many years of our experience, we had to and we have to address challenges related to transporting drilling rigs to large distances. We worked in Iraq, in Bangladesh, and within the Russian Federation, we worked in the northwestern regions all the way to eastern Siberia, and therefore, so to say, it is a normal course of the business to be addressing the logistical problems and challenges. But I have to say that the specifics of working in Arctic are a bit larger and wider. One of the examples, for example, of such major logistic tasks is transportation of a new drilling rig from Shanghai, from China, to 27,000 over 27,000 kilometers distance to Arctic, which is this is a large enclosed drilling rig of Arctic class, which we had to transport over 27,000 kilometers from Shanghai all the way to the deposit and to gas field. And there were a lot of problems, logistical problems to be addressed during transportation. For example, we have to understand that in the very beginning, when we were starting with this project, we didn't even have a pier to park a ship, so we had to unload the cargo onto ice, and it was happening in April, May. when the ice started melting and we were risking to lose the cargo. And of the recent examples, we had a large and quite quick transportation to Obsky SPG this year, 2021, when in less than 3 months, we transported a rig with all the auxiliaries to using again the northern sea route. In Arctic, we have not only logistical challenges. We understand that almost all projects in Arctic are autonomous. That is, we do not have permanent roads. So for over 6 months, we have a 6-month window to when the temporary winter roads are available, and you are limited with this time, with this window. You have to transport complete not only your rail or sea or road transportation, but also complete transportation over these temporary roads. It's a challenging task, but we are a logistical and drilling company, so as we often joke, so we've been managing to this task everywhere, including Arctic.
Thank you. So over 27,000 kilometers, you said, to bring a rig from Shanghai to the gas field. Quite a feat. So Alexander, I'll turn to you next. So I believe you're in Nadim right now, which is quite close to the Arctic Circle. So I think you'd be quite well placed to tell us more about the daily routine of Arctic workers. And perhaps you could also tell us about the geological and technical challenges faced by a drilling company like ERIELL in Russia's far north.
Yes, dear friends, good afternoon. Yes, I am indeed in Nadim now. It's this is a place on the 65 north. It's where the Arctic starts. And only North Pole is farther. Our working day of the polar worker in summer, that is a polar day. So when you go to work at 7 a.m. and go back to 7 p.m., so you have sun shining over your head at all times, but in during polar night, that's the opposite. You see no light throughout the working day, and you only have polar nights around you. But nevertheless, our colleagues working at the drilling rigs of Arctic class that are fully enclosed rigs, quite powerful ones, that are the size of a 20-storied building. They work indoor, so to say. So this is a technical solution that allows us to work in Arctic, and where the temperatures can be as low as minus 60 C. And this is not the biggest challenge. But the very strong winds, cold and strong winds of 30 meters per second, is something that these enclosed rigs help us manage. Speaking of geological or technological challenges that we as the drilling companies face, I have to note, first of all, that the biggest risk from technological point of view, environmental point of view, is with gas fountains. That is this is a phenomenon that happens much faster than on oil fields. And the ability to quickly predict this movement and create barriers to prevent fountaining, this is the biggest challenge of the Arctic drillers. About 70% of the fluid or is a gas, and maybe 20% can be condensate and 10% oil. But it is the gas part that poses the biggest challenge for the drillers in Arctic. We have to understand that polar night is when you only see faint northern sun for 2 hours per day. So you work in dark around the clock. And that makes serious psychological impact on the workers, especially during the first 10 days in the shift that are the hardest before you get used. But as Alexander said, wind is one of the biggest problems other than cold, because we have to understand that about 20 meters per second is a normal standard situation in these areas, and the people who people elsewhere in Russia get emergency alerts already at 17 meters per second, where the Ministry of Emergency says that don't stay in open fields. This is the kind of wind that can remove trees and break trees, and these winds of 20 to 30 meters per second can knock an adult man off your feet, and you cannot stay outdoor. And with this wind we need to manage deliveries of workers in buses even for 100 200 meters, because you cannot walk even for short distances. And in winter you may just get lost. You can see nothing as in half a meter. So this is how serious the wind load is. And of course, surviving in this northern hell. If you are lost, if you are in tundra, you have no visual cues. So people who get lost, they just freeze to death. Oh, don't tell them these scary stories. We never had any cases, and we will not, I hope. This is why we transport people from the camp to the rig in buses, even over shorter distances. Of course, safety is our biggest priority, and we are now talking about winter. Summers are easier, but we had other challenges. You had oxygen starvation. The oxygen content is not very good in this region, and we had cases where people in summer we had flash floods that make our rigs an island surrounded by water, and we had to transport equipment using special floating mechanisms, semi-floating. So we had challenges in summer too. Yes. And insects they are something that adds to the romance.
Right. Well, I mean, how, your workers are doing very technical work. They need to be well rested, and with these white nights and dark days, is it really hard for workers that are coming into that environment? Is it hard for them to adapt, not to have insomnia, to be well rested? Alexander, maybe you could tell us about this.
Да, ну,
Yes, Vitaly already said that the adaptation period and getting used to this regime takes about 10 days, and I can confirm the second that I've been working in polar areas for a long time. But it's a moral challenge, but a psychological challenge. But after the hard working days, it is really important to have a comfortable rest time. All it takes is a good supper, Russian bath, and maybe some chatting with the colleagues. But in 12 hours, you get so exhausted that the only thing you can think of is sleeping well, so as to get up next morning and come to your shift in good moods. And I don't remember of any feelings of discomfort myself. But in summer, often you have soccer, football games that you spend watching in between the shifts, and that is something that makes the team stronger and help you forget about the hardships of the day. But overall, you get so tired that you don't think even about it. What matters is sleep and food. These are the main criteria of normal well-being of a human being in these conditions.
The essentials. And finally, over to you, Mark. So Novatek, Russia's biggest independent gas producer, its biggest LNG exporter, and your main base of operations is in the Russian north, and now on the Yamal Peninsula and the Gaidan Peninsula. How competitive is Arctic exploration and development today, especially considering the volatile price environment we've had for gas and oil over the past year with coronavirus?
Joseph, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I'd like to thank both Vitaly and Alexander and ERIELL for the work they've done at our Yamal LNG project, as well as the drilling that you're doing today at Arctic LNG 2. The challenges that Vitaly talked about before, just on the logistics, often get overlooked. I mean, people talk about just the Arctic conditions in terms of weather, but to execute a major project is a massive logistical, question that has to be tackled, because you only have certain parts of the year where you can actually transport goods across the waterborne. And then, when we opened up the Sabeta airport, the international airport, we were able to bring in crews on a more regular basis. And now we just completed the runway, and actually some flights already on the Utrene terminal, which will service the Arctic LNG 2 project. I think when you look at the cost side of the operations, I mean, one of the things that we have demonstrated historically, whether you talk about drilling in the reserve base, which we call, attributable to the UGSS, or the Unified Gas Supply System, which is below the Arctic zone for us, or the drilling that we attributed to, our LNG platform, which is in both, as you rightly mentioned, both Yamal and Gaidan peninsulas.
Mm-hmm.
What we're experiencing so far, say out of the, Yamal LNG, the cost of gas, the feedstock gas, to get it into the plant has been averaging about 7 cents per MMBTU. So what we do, we obviously probably spend more on a rig and the drilling operations, as Alexander was talking about, the enclosure, like, for example, whether it's the Arctica design rig or the Aurora rig that's being used by ERIELL, your self-contained units, and it's obviously costs more to construct and build and operate, but the flow rates, et cetera, when we go down to whether we're developing the Valentinian layer or the Achimov or Jurassic, the flow rates that we're getting on our production wells are pretty high relative to average industry flow rates globally. And so this actually drops the actual cost of drilling or production per drilling down significantly, which makes part of our liquefied natural gas very competitive globally. So that's one of the competitive advantages we have today, is that our feedstock gas is cheap relative to the industry average, and this allows us to look at where we can sell LNG globally at one of the lowest costs landed in the marketplace today. But there's many challenges. I think with Aleksandr and both Vitaly were talking about, I think this often gets overlooked, because I think it was about 3-4 years ago, I did no, maybe even longer than maybe 6 years ago, I did a presentation at a flame conference in Amsterdam, talking just solely on the human element of operating in the Arctic zone. I mean, people every year I'd come back and show them updates of what's going on. But I felt one day that, people really don't understand the challenges. I lived in Norilsk for 6 months, so I understand what Alexander's talking about, being in the Arctic zone between polar summers and the cold winters. And you have people that are out there that are working in minus 40 degrees Celsius weather. And there's a huge amount of security and safety measures that you have to take to ensure that your crews are operating effectively, they're safe, they're not getting exposed to, these Arctic conditions where, you can have accidents, et cetera, people, taking shortcuts because they're cold. The other thing that, Vitaly was talking about is often over there, people look at the winter side of it, but when you go to the summer, if you looked at a cubic meter of permafrost, when it melts, about 3/4 of it is water. So, as you rightly said, you got all these waterborne, and you only can drill at certain times of the year. And when people think only the severe cold weather as being one of the issues, you also forget the mosquitoes that happen in the swamplands in the summertime, which actually I think is more problematic when you're there than you're actually in the colder weather, because you can adjust for the colder temperature. But I think overall, when we look at the drilling program, that, for example, in Arctic LNG 2, we have 3 domes that we're working on: the North, Central, and South Dome. We have some unexplored area within the acreage of the Utrene field. We're planning to drill about 161 production wells for this particular project. And as of today, we're drilling mainly for GBS train number 1. And I think we've been averaging, Vitaly can probably correct me, but we're averaging about 6 wells a quarter, it seems like we're drilling between the 2 main contractors up there. And as of the end of March, we were about 29 production wells drilled, or about 40% of the drilling that we need for the first production train. So, it's a challenge, but I think even though, like I said, you're spending maybe more on a per well drilling basis than we would see globally, but I think the production flows that we get out of each well, and the completion techniques that we're using, whether we go down into the Achimov or Jurassic layers, we're doing now 8 to 10 stage fracking programs. I think the well flows that we're getting out of these wells are much higher, which actually then reduces the cost of drilling for us, and allows us to bring in gas to the LNG complex at, like I said, about 7 cents per MMBTU.
Right. Well, the mosquito problem, I think, is bad enough in Moscow.
May I add?
Yes, go ahead.
We don't read Novatek's financial statements regularly, but when we do, we see the numbers that to us as a drilling contractor look and sound like a music, and to make us optimistic. Novatek is one of the first companies that had actively explored deposit and Jurassic layers and deposits, and we've been working with Novatek for over 11 years, and over this period, I have to say that we have advanced together technologically, and a lot has been contributed by the Novatek R&D Center, and Alexander can further expand this thought. And Novatek, as the employer, is one of the most advanced companies. Yes, indeed, Vitaly, I can confirm it. And the level of technological complexity of the wells that we construct for Novatek in this region has not been dared to try. Nobody has even dared to try. So Novatek are true pioneers. And at the end of the day, we get the result of multiple times, multiple fold increase in the flow thanks to the multi-stage drilling technology. And thanks to Novatek, we have jumped into the area of latest and newest technology, which I can confirm as because I have first-hand experience in this in Achman Jurassic deposits, and this is a strategy that has paid back in at over a longer distance, because which we can see from the confirmed reserves and produced volumes. We might not be aware of the exact numbers as a drilling contractor, but from what we read, we see that the LNG demand for LNG is increasing, and we are happy to learn that that means that there will be a further demand for our drilling services.
Well, we'll be talking more about the global demand for gas soon, but we've been talking about logistics of bringing all of this equipment, drilling equipment, and production equipment into the Arctic. How much of this equipment is Russian made? You mentioned this rig coming from Shanghai. To what extent does ERIELL and also Novatek, to what extent do you rely on Russian-made equipment and technology? And are you moving towards increased localization of content?
Currently, we are actively using domestic rigs, Russian rigs. That case study was about the Chinese rig, but we are currently actively working using Arctic rigs made at Uralmash in Russia. So Arctic, they call it Arctic Light. So this is a domestic equipment, and I have to note that over the last years, thanks to the government's interventions, the cost of production was reduced thanks to the contribution of the special Russian domestic production fund, and domestic technology became more affordable. We lease these rigs, and in the last years, I think we are not going to change the orientation. So we had been and we will be buying domestic rigs.
Mm-hmm. Mark, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to mention, Vitaly mentioned that these rigs are built at Euromash, so they are domestic. They are domestic rigs, because they have a certain type of rig that has to be used in the Arctic zone. It has different tensile strengths, et cetera, on the drilling because of the ambient temperature changes in the Arctic. But as we relate to, say, the LNG complex, we're building and constructing our LNG construction center in Murmansk. And this is the only fully dedicated LNG construction plant in the world. And we're trying to localize as much as we can. And I think when I look at how we started out, say, Arctic LNG 2 and the concept of localizing, because we realized, as Vitaly was talking about, the logistical difference. When we did Yamal, we had, many contractors working around the world trying to bring all these products back and forth, on specially built, tankers that actually delivered a lot of these huge modules that came across, and because they were coming out of the Chinese fabrication yards, et cetera. Stuff was in Singapore, stuff was coming out of the Middle East. And so we thought that in order for us to develop the LNG expertise inside of Russia, we decided to go with this construction yard in Murmansk. And so one of the things we did very early on is we held many workshops with, almost like 800 contractors would come back and forth. We would hold these big workshops to get the understanding, from what Russia can do internally. We would give them parameters, they would come back. And what we see so far is, a lot of the equipment, is coming out of Russia. We had, on our Yamal project, we're using the first cryogenic pumps that we're using currently today, which is fabricated in Russia. We've been working on the Arctic Cascade liquefaction technology, which is developed inside of Russia through our engineers. We still have to fabricate part of it externally, but the idea is to shift eventually that type of construction activity in the Murmansk yard. So like, for example, on the GBSs, so each GBS, the concrete pouring is actually done in Murmansk. So we have 2 docks. They're basically, now we have cement, plants there and everything, and they're basically working on the concrete block. Then what we do, we're looking at maybe 14 modules that would be attached onto this GBS structure. Most of those today are being fabricated in China. Now, what will happen is, say, compressors and turbines from Novatek of Baker Hughes or Siemens, they will get shipped out to China and put into the modules, but they're usually tested at the site, and then they get transported back into Murmansk. And the idea is, once the GBS are done, we have a window of opportunity where we tow the GBS from Murmansk actually to the Utrane terminal port, and then it gets moored and docked at that particular point in time. So the idea is to continue working domestically so that we can increase the level of localization. And the plan is, by the second GBS and third GBS, we should see a huge shift over to the whole construction activity being done inside of Russia. Now, that doesn't mean that it's 100% Russia content. It may mean that some of these companies have actually working with us to help us with the facilities inside of Murmansk through partnerships, et cetera. But the idea is to move as much as possible to build up the local expertise, as well as develop the area, develop, the competencies, the technical skills, et cetera, inside of Russia, just like we see in the shipbuilding. Traditionally you see shipbuilding either Korea, South Korea, China, Japan. Now we have Vesda in Russia, and Vesda is actually building up the capabilities. So we're contracting out 15 of our ARC-7 ice class tankers to Vesda as part of our, Arctic LNG 2 project, which will have 21. 6 will still be constructed at DSME in South Korea. But the idea is that slowly we want to see that the domestic content, because it obviously has a multiplier effect on the economies. And, we want to make sure that Vitaly and these groups are there and they're working, and that when we need them to drill, and be the service provider, contractor for us, we want to make sure that they get the appropriate level of work. So we actually weigh both. We look at it from a perspective of, can a Russian contractor provide that service? That's the first thing we do, and if they can or cannot, then we look at, is it the quality we want? If they can't do it, obviously we go external. But the idea is to build up this expertise. And, between our Tumen, research center, which helps with the drilling and geological, geophysical work, and the construction yard that we have in Murmansk, I think we will build the capabilities inside of Russia that will service the majority of our future LNG complexes.
I think it's quite interesting that we were talking about how the very low ambient temperature in the Arctic is obviously a challenge to operate in, but it is that very cold ambient temperature which your Arctic Cascade technology uses, takes advantage of to reduce the cost of liquefaction process?
I think, Joseph, to be honest, it really affects the whole value chain, you know, from production, et cetera, because when you're at minus 40 degrees Celsius and you're liquefying, you know, gas at minus 163 degrees Celsius, you know, when you're comparing yourself to, say, a Gulf Coast project in the United States, you know, which may be plus 26 Celsius, you know, 85, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or, you know, a guitar project, which you might be plus 40 degrees Celsius, or, you know, 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, we have, you know, 60 to 80 degree temperature, you know, ambient temperature advantage to us, which ultimately decreases the intensity of the units that we need to use, plus increases the output. So what we really see is that Yamal has been operating at, you know, pretty much average about 114% of its nameplate capacity. And we're now working with the contractors to see if we can even raise that further up. And, you know, largely due to the ambient temperature. And you're right, Arctic Cascade, which is a technology that's tried to simplify the liquefaction process by using nitrogen, not having multi-fluid cascades, simplifying the cascade with nitrogen is actually, you know, based on the fact that, you know, we have a certain degree of ambient temperature in that region. And so that's what we're doing right now. So when we officially commissioned, you know, sort of the fourth train at Arctic LNG, at Yamal LNG, you know, now we're in that testing period. It's operating, and we need, I would say we need easily probably 12 to 18 months of testing to see what modifications as we go through seasonal climatic changes. Because obviously at a colder temperature, it's more efficient. When it gets down a little lower, you know, warmer, it may not be as efficient in its operations, and that's what we need to test right now. But the idea is that, yes, the ambient temperature does have a positive impact to our operations and the liquefaction of LNG.
So there is, of course, opposition in some quarters of society to the concept of Arctic oil and gas development. If I could start with you, Vitaly, and I'm sure, Alexander, you can also weigh in on this, and you, Mark. Is this opposition understandable, and what do you do on the ground? You know, your activities, what do you do to limit their environmental impact? Could start with you, Vitaly.
Ну, наверное, нужно сказать.
I have to say, it's not, maybe it's not an answer to your question, but still, development of gas production or extraction is more environmentally friendly than coal or oil or even oil. So gas is inherently clean product. But answering your question, we use all the modern approaches to minimizing negative impact onto the environment that exist. And Alexander can chime in too, but we, wherever possible, whenever possible, wherever exist negative risks, we do everything to mitigate them. We try our best, and we use the best in the drilling wall. Yes, yes, indeed. The use of internal combustion engines for drilling will still have a hydrocarbon trail, but modern drilling rigs, they are used, they are closed loop units that prevent the discharge of any fluids, and all the waste is stored at a special area and processed, As a result of recycling, we create new construction materials that can be used in open construction sites in tundra itself. And on each drilling site, we have thermal destruction of hydrocarbon waste, and through thermal decomposition, we remove all the hydrocarbon residues, and similarly, when mixing these processed waste with sand and cement, we create another byproduct, a construction material. So these are the biggest things that can be done to reduce environmental impact behind Pollock cycle.
Thank you. And Mark, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think first of all, let's put the Arctic in a proper context. A few years back, the U.S. Geological Service came out with their assessment on the resource base inside of the Arctic zone, and they basically said that approximately 20% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves and approximately 30% of the undiscovered gas reserves resides in the Arctic zone, of which 75% oil, 90% gas resides in the Arctic zone of Russia. Okay, so it just gives you sort of an overview that the Arctic zone is extremely important in terms of future development in the oil and gas industry. Now, obviously, you have, due to its sort of climatic conditions, its sensitive natures, et cetera, that people talk about in terms of preserving the Arctic zone, we have to take special precautions to it. I mean, I think one of the things that you see a lot of NGOs will start talking about, you're destroying the Arctic zone, et cetera. And it's basically the things that people are talking about that are not backed up by facts. I mean, you have to really see what we're doing in the Arctic zone before you can make a broad brush discussion that just the very nature in the Arctic means you're going to destroy the Arctic. I think that's a huge fallacy. We take extreme precautions, et cetera, in all of our operations up in the Arctic zone. I mean, if we look at permafrost as another example, permafrost, the Yamal project, we drilled 38,000 pilings. Anybody who was up there, Vitaly or Aleksandr, could confirm that it was a huge engineering feat to go there and watch just these pilings being drilled, and then all the equipment lay on top of the pilings. And so you did that, and inside there you have heat exchangers that are monitored on real-time basis between our technology center in Tumen and our operators and the panels at the Yamal facility. So you can actually measure any movement in real time, any effect on permafrost. This is a leapfrog in technology than what was maybe done 30, 40 years ago when some of this stuff was originally built under the old Soviet legacy. I mean, huge changes in technology. And so I think it's kind of a misnomer to assume that just the fact that you're in the Arctic zone that you're not careful what you do. And we just published on July 15th, we published our 14th sustainability report. And our sustainability report actually outlines one of the new topics we talked about was permafrost management, waste management, things that we've had. We've actually disclosed, scope 1 by source, scope 3 now for the first time. And you can actually see, if you look at our scope 1, scope 2 emissions, out of the total scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, scope 1 and 2, which is direct and indirect through power we use, it represents only 5% of our total emissions, meaning 95% of that emissions is being done on a combustion side. Which obviously we are working with our customers, to help them, try to lower that number. But within the things that we control, it represents only 5% of the emissions. And so you can see whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. Novatek is actually one of the lowest globally. And we're low because, first of all, we're a gas company. When we have, 90% of our production and resources are natural gas, we actually start out with a very low carbon footprint because gas is a cleaner burning fuel. And so when you look at our reports and you can see the statistics that we outlined in the new metrics that we introduced on our sustainability report, you can see that we have actually done quite a good job. And the numbers that we published in terms of our goals to 2030, because I think the last time you and I spoke about whether or not you want to talk about 2050 and the aspirational goals, I mentioned that you really don't see any concrete steps to achieve those aspirational goals to 2050. We do have concrete steps because we know what we're doing in a period to 2030 right now. And we'll deal with beyond 2030 when we update our strategy in 2022. But yes, I think it's a misnomer, and I think we take precautions, whether it's shipping, liquefaction, the drilling contractors, the construction yards, et cetera. I think we do a fabulous job in ensuring the well-being of the environment in which we operate. And we work closely with the administration, the local administration. We work closely with the Russian government, et cetera, on ensuring that this is done.
And keeping with the...
Я бы добавил...
Sorry, please add.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I can give you a funny example that illustrates our attitude to the animal life in Arctic. In one of our projects, I will not be naming which one, there was a polar bear that frequented our camp and creating some threats and risks to our staff. We had, albeit small, but a complete investment project to find a solution not to hurt the bear, but protect our workers at the same time. So we considered the different ways of whether you can use options, whether you can use, for example, electric fences or barbed wire. We even wrote a letter to the ministry if we asked them if we can put the bear to sleep, not kill him, but temporarily put him to sleep and transport it farther from the camp while monitoring its health. They said no. So at the end of the day, we ended up solving the issue without using any tools that would harm the bear. So we just scaring the bear away from our camp was the only method. So we have to be careful not only about plants but also animal life in Arctic too. So we get these challenges all the time.
So let me add just another point that
Go ahead.
When you look at the projects that you do, in such of a nature of ERIELL LNG or Arctic LNG 2, where you're getting a large part of external financing, you can go through a series of due diligence work, obviously, right? And part of the due diligence work from the financing side is a full review of the environmental, social programs, et cetera, that you're going to do at these particular plants, right? So you have third-party external, advisors working not only with Novatek, as our advisors, but also with the sponsor, with the banks, at the lenders. And when you look at ERIELL LNG, for example, right, what they did when they came in, they actually projected that the greenhouse gas emissions, per ton of CO2 of LNG was going to be 0.33, right? And that in itself was lower than the average globally. When you look at the actual results that we achieved already in 2020, it's not 0.33 with the third-party consultant was saying that would be fantastic if you can reach that level. We actually are lower, we're 0.24, which makes ERIELL LNG one of the lowest greenhouse gas emission projects of a large-scale LNG plants in the world today. And when we look at Arctic LNG 2, we think it'll be the same thing. when the consultants came in and did their assessment or are in the process of doing an assessment, they assigned a number that they believe that the plan would do. I actually think the results that we will achieve on an actual basis will be lower. And so I think, like I said before, that we do a fairly good job in managing the environmental impacts of our projects in the Arctic zone.
Okay, and we've touched on this already. We've talked a bit about the environmental benefits of gas, for example, by replacing coal in Asia. What lies in store for, Russian Arctic gas development? What's the trajectory? And what's the trajectory for development in the Russian Arctic in general? You have things like the Northern Sea Route, taking shape as a viable major sea route for global trade. Things like that. I mean, I know it's a broad question, but maybe Vitaly, maybe you'd like to comment first.
We as the Russians, we know the history of the development of Arctic. It's full of interesting stories and events. Mark has already outlined some economics numbers. We understand that Arctic is an extremely rich territory, and it will be used anyway. And despite all the difficulties associated with this process, and 20 to 30% of global deposits are there. And speaking of the Northern Sea Route, but we know that we have a target of making it a year-long trade route by 2030, and that is open around the year. So, and this will help address the costs of transportation via Suez Canal, and this route will be much more economically attractive because of reduced distances. So there are two factors: huge deposits and projected technological development of technologies that will make the use of this logistics route, the Northern Sea route, more attractive. I think will result in exponential growth, explosive growth of the development in this area. Even today, if we just look at Cyclopic, the Novatek's facilities, including all their projects, and with even the number of people living there has increased from 20 to 30,000 over a very few years, and that is only example of one company, which is a large company, Novatek. But we understand that there are other giants like Nornickel and Nickel and many others that will be working and coming into the region, and or Gazprom. So we will see a lot of international cooperation. So the companies will come to this region, and of course the current limitations are felt, and it is always difficult to be the first to have the first experience, and we are now talking about transporting the rigs over dozens of thousands of kilometers as during the first projects. But when you have economies of scale, when you have greater volumes, and that you can see the attractive economics of Novatek gas that make the gas even cheaper than in many countries like Qatar or other countries in the Middle East. And the Arctic offers us great opportunities to reduce the production costs per BTU. And that makes me believe that the trajectory will be very positive, and even with different level of technological capabilities. 500 years ago, the northern route was had attracted a lot of interest by both Russian and Western travelers, and now that is because the globe is smaller in this area. It is and there are reserves over there, and I see a lot of potential. So with technological advances, we will be ensuring faster and better development trajectory. And I would add, friends, that 30% is confirmed reserve. My father 30 years ago was telling me that these places, Yamal, and are like a multi-layer pie. And at the time, they didn't even have equipment to work with the pressures of the gas wells that their exploration was discovering. And we remember that Mikhail Lomonosov said that all the wealth of Russia is in Siberia. And today we can rephrase it and say that Arctic is the host of Russia's wealth. Just an addition.
Mark, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add some to that because, the Northern Sea route is going to play an integral part of our, optimization of our shipping model. So when we go back in time a little bit, we actually were the first company to deliver hydrocarbons through the Northern Sea route. And we did that by sending, in 2010, we sent our first cargo of condensate from the White Sea across the Northern Sea route to China. And we determined at that particular point in time that this made a huge change in the logistical model, rather than going down through, westbound through Mediterranean, down the Suez Canal, Indian Ocean, up through the Strait of Malacca. And we determined that the distance as well as the time was at least 40% plus savings by using the Northern Sea route. So one of the key elements of the development of our LNG strategy is to eventually use the Northern Sea route on an annual basis rather than the 6+ months that we can use it today. Last year, we were very successful. We actually opened up the Arctic and Northern Sea route transport usually about a month earlier. So we started in May, and we actually extended it to December and January, which is the first time hydrocarbons have ever been transported or the Northern Sea route has been used at this particular period of time to go to the Asian Pacific market. Again, we opened up the Northern Sea route again this year. It was about 3 weeks later, it was in June, as a result of heavier ice flows. It wasn't really the ice coverage. We have to also worry about the ice flows that come in through the bay, which causes some problems, for shipping the logistics side. But the Russian government has been, very, very, advocating the use of the Northern Sea route. And, President Putin has actually said that by mid-decade, so 2025, he wants to see about 80 million tons of cargo transported through the Northern Sea route. Our development is to increase our output today from just under 20 million tons of LNG to up to 70 million tons by the end of this decade. And again, like I said, an important part of our our logistics is actually headed through the Northern Sea route, because that's really where the demand center is. I mean, when we look at future LNG or gas demand, it's not the EU as an example. I mean, the EU is serviced by pipeline and or LNG, but the demand growth is in the Asian Pacific region. So when you look at an area of China, India, the traditional, Japan, Taiwan, Korea type of operations, and then you see some of the newer emerging ones, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, et cetera. This region, is going to represent, more than 45% of the consumption of future natural gas. So when we see the importance of, developing a model that's trying to have the lowest landed LNG costs in the world, obviously using the Northern Sea route with our ARC-7 ice class tankers, allows us to, reduce our transit costs. And we believe that the initial model that we did a couple of years ago, that we looked at this, and I'm sure it's going to get revised, because now we're working on ARC-7, generation 2, in terms of its model of ship, that we felt that we can probably save about 80 cents per MMBTU of just going through the Northern Sea route. And not only is that a savings in cost, it also reduces the amount of boil off gas that you consume in operation. And that's why, as part of our logistic model, Joseph, we're building the 2 transshipping complexes. So we're going to put the one in Murmansk, in Europe Bay and Murmansk, that's going to actually send cargoes to the European market. And we're building, probably more importantly for us in this whole Asia Pacific logistic model, is the transshipment complex that we're going to build in Kamchatka. Mm-hmm. And so this now allows us just to go across the Northern Sea route only to this point. And from that point forward, we can use conventional tankers, to deliver to the end consumer market. So it's definitely an important element in our strategy. But in order to facilitate that, we also have to make sure that the government delivers, which I believe they would, deliver their new nuclear ice class fleet, particularly when we look at the 120 megawatt liter ice class tankers, which will then open this up without doubt, because we're now able to go through the Northern Sea route, and we demonstrated last year, even without the assistance of the nuclear icebreakers, because that's the efficiency of the icebreaking capability of the ARC-7. But to get it open year round, we would need these liter icebreakers to be delivered, and that would open up the season for us to be able to deliver LNG full time. And that's why I think when we forecast our LNG movement, 80 to 85% of our LNG is earmarked to go to the Asian Pacific market.
Mm-hmm. So the story is in Asia. Okay, we've had a few questions come in. So one to you, Vitaly. So how many rigs do you operate at the moment at Novatek's projects on Yamal and Gaidan? Is the largest of the rigs located at the Uchrenia field? And how many wells are planned for completion on that field this and next year? I can repeat parts of that question again if you like.
No, we're good.
Сказать, что 6, потому
currently we have 6. Five rigs are already operational, and for the sixth we have just been awarded a contract. So we have 6 rigs either operational or in the soon to become operational. And most of the largest number of rigs is indeed on Ukraine. I cannot give you the numbers for the next year as to how many wells we're planning to drill in Arctic LNG this year. I did not understand this part of the question.
So how many wells are planned at the field? But if you don't have the information. Yeah.
Aleksandr
I mean, the total wells.
Look, one rig on Utreni takes 40-45 days. So one rig can drill 5 wells, or three rigs can accordingly drill up to 15-20 wells. But currently we have already completed 24 wells, but that took 2 years.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. So to you, Mark, actually, no, I'll take this one. So how long is the current season for winter roads? What are your forecasts for how climate change may shorten this season over the next decade? Do you have alternative supply options if delivery via the routes becomes more complicated? It doesn't say who it's addressed to. So who would like to respond?
Коллеги, наверное, я скажу.
Colleagues, I will address this. The winter roads start in December after the November cold weather. In December the winter roads start operating, and the season ends at the end of April. Although we still have snow later, but the roads are unusable by then, so the soil gets softer and the floods will start. So it's December to April.
And to you, Mark, Arctic LNG-1 is currently running tenders to spud 5 deep appraisal wells into Akimov formations on the Gaidan license block. Does it mean that Novatek does not see any gas potential in shallow layers at the Gaidan block, which should be less expensive to develop against Akimov?
No, it doesn't mean that the shallower location. I mean, the Achimov and, as we mentioned earlier, in the Jurassic are areas where we see, a contribution of higher proportion of liquids coming out of the field too. So, one thing we didn't mention throughout this discussion is that we actually produce both natural gas and condensate from these particular fields. And so as we go deeper, our experience has been, as we go deeper into the formations, meaning the Achimov or the Jurassic, what we've seen is a higher percentage of, it's calculated grams per MCM. So we see a higher level of condensate concentration. And I just give you an example that if we looked at our field development historically, and if we start out with, say, the East Tarko-Salinskoy field, which is one of the earlier fields, probably, what we would consider to be the core fields of Novatek pre-LNG, we were producing about, 100 grams per cubic meter of liquids. Once we went down to the deeper formations, as we moved to the Harskoy field, we started seeing that going up in the 250 range as we were developing the Valanginian. But it really took off substantially when we started doing drilling at the Arctic gas locations, and we started going into the Achimov and Jurassic, because as Aleksandr said before, one of the things that we had to overcome was high pressure wells. And so the technology, the completion technology was there. Now it is. So by working with our contractors and engineers, we've been able to successfully raise that number from 400 grams, to almost 800 grams per cubic meter. So you can see that we're producing a higher percentage of condensate liquid per MCM of gas produced. And this is valuable for us because we're able to sell that globally at high rates, and because it's linked into an oil price kind of formula in terms of price. So, to say that we're going to ignore the lower formations, I think that's not an accurate statement. I think the plan is to go down to these particular targets because that's where we see most value coming in terms of the resource base for us. And so whether you look at, if you look at Arctic LNG 1, which now we're in the exploration stage, more or less, we have planned in 2021 to drill, I think, 13 exploration wells and run about 2,600 kilometers of 3D seismic. We have, completed our first half a year results already in terms of what we wanted to accomplish for the first half of the year. And, I think we'll continue moving down to the same track where we'll continue targeting the deeper horizons, because we see that's where the value is and that's where most of the reserves are resident. But it doesn't mean that we are basically ignoring, the lower, shallower formations. If they're there, we would obviously produce from them at a later date. But I think right now, in terms of the operations, I think we'll continue with the Valentinian and we'll continue with the Achimov and Jurassic layers.
Mm-hmm. So we've ran over a bit in terms of time, but I invite all of you to make closing remarks. I only ask that you keep them fairly brief. Vitaly, maybe you would like to start us off.
I'll try to be brief. We are proud as a drilling company to be working with the most advanced gas companies of the country, including Novatek, and in the last for a couple of years we had been leading in the rankings of the drilling contractors, and that's a result of huge teamwork that we have established with our employers. And secondly, Arctic means future means Arctic, and despite all the challenges, I'm sure that the development trajectory will be steep and fast, and we will see it in the near future. Like Sabeta grew over several years, we will see many more projects from different companies, including Russian and international ones. Thank you.
So Arctic is future and future is Arctic. Anyone else?
Well, I just probably like to just say that, when we talk about the decarbonization process and we talk about climate change, I think, natural gas will play a major role in decarbonizing the world, despite calls for reducing investments in oil and gas projects, and reducing the flow of fossil fuels for power generation. I just don't see that as being a scenario that's a realistic scenario when you look at that natural gas, and Russia actually is one of the largest natural gas producers in the world, it's reliable, it's secure, it's affordable, and it's proven. And it's proven its ability to decarbonize society, as you rightly said before, the coal to gas switching. What we're saying here is gas is not the only solution, right? There's obviously going to be renewable mix, there's going to be hydrogen mix, et cetera, when we start working on the hydrogen elements of our business. But the reality is that gas is there today and it's reliable. And we can produce it in large enough quantities to make dramatic changes in this decarbonization process. And I think what we should have a realistic assessment of what we are talking about in reaching net zero by 2050, and obviously continue to promote, because the more we talk negatively about oil and gas development, this has a multiplier effect on whether investors are going to be willing to come into oil and gas stocks, whether the capital markets is going to be willing to finance these particular projects. And I think that sends the wrong message when we demonize the oil and gas industry. And I think what we should be doing is, in our position, we're a pathway forward to decarbonization is more gas, not less gas.
Mm-hmm. So unless anyone else has anything to add, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for attending, and for all those of you that tuned in to listen. This has been the Overcoming the Arctic Drilling Challenge webinar, brought to you by ERIELL Group. Thank you very much.
Asia and Europe. the Arctic and the desert. We implement projects in the most challenging geological conditions. We successfully build drill wells in extreme temperatures. We penetrate down to 9,000 meters in the earth, and we reach new heights every day. We are among the fastest growing independent drilling companies in the world. We are one of the top 3 Russian Federation market leaders. We are ERIELL. ERIELL specializes in horizontal drilling and the construction of controlled directional wells. We can work in extreme temperatures and abnormal formation pressure. Our experience in implementing projects in various regions around the world allows us to quickly adapt to new geographic, infrastructural, and regulatory features of working in different countries. ERIELL has offices and representative offices in many countries around the world. ERIELL's drilling rigs are localized in places of active and potential hydrocarbon production and are concentrated in 2 areas, south and north. This makes it easier to move equipment and mobilize tool rigs for new projects. We have one of the youngest and most technologically advanced drilling rig fleets for oil and gas well constructions. From mobile to unique, super heavy rigs with a load capacity of over 600 tons. We efficiently invest in the constant updating of equipment. We are working on expanding the range of our capacities to meet our customers' requirements. ERIELL successfully works with leading Russian and foreign oil and gas industry companies. They include Rosneft, Lukoil, Novatek, Gazpromneft, Yamal LNG, Achimgaz, Uzbekneftgaz, and Petronas. We carry out projects at the highest technological level and have worked for many years with reliable companies such as Halliburton, Weatherford, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, and other global leaders of oilfield services. We adhere to the most stringent international standards in the field of industrial safety, labor protection, and environment. Our strength lies not only in experience in the tool rigs. Our people are our main asset and wealth. Our team has grown from 10 to 8,000 people in just 12 years. And we remain united. A large team stands behind each drilling rig and each document. All kinds of people believe in the company, grow with it, and love what they do. ERIELL, with respect for tradition, care for people, at the forefront of technology.